She got locked out of her apartment 1 hour later. She was drinking wine in a mafia boss's penthouse. The wind in Grey Ridge did not just blow, it bit. It had a way of finding the smallest gap in a scarf, the thinnest patch in a wool coat, and sinking its teeth directly into the bone. It was the kind of cold that turned the city into a grayscale painting of exhaust fumes, gray slush, and huddled figures trying to get from one heated box to another. Maya Collins was currently between boxes. She stood in the vestibule of her apartment building, the heavy shopping bag digging a red trench into her palm. Her other hand rummaged frantically through her purse, tossing aside old receipts, pens that probably didn't work, and a lip balm that had lost its cap. The panic started as a small, cold knot in her stomach and expanded rapidly outward until her fingers were shaking uncontrollably. The keys were not there. She stopped moving, squeezed her eyes shut, and visualized the small, brass key ring. She saw it perfectly. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to the empty coffee mug she had rinsed out that morning. She had put it down to tie her bootlace. She had walked out the door. She had heard the heavy click of the deadbolt sliding home automatically behind her. No. Maya let out a groan that was half frustration, half despair. She leaned her forehead against the cool, peeling paint of the inner security door. It was 7 o'clock on a Friday night. She had just finished a 10-hour shift at the architecture firm where she was currently designing bathrooms for people who made more money in a week than she made in a year. She was exhausted. She was hungry. And she was locked out. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers stiff and clumsy. 5% battery. Perfect. She dialed the superintendent first. Mr. Henderson was a nice enough man, but he treated his phone like an ornamental object rather than a communication device. It rang 4 times before clicking over. You have reached the voicemail of Gary Henderson. Please leave a message. Maya hung up without speaking. She dialed the emergency locksmith number saved in her contacts from the last time the building's front door jammed. A bored voice answered on the second ring. Service. Hi, I'm locked out of my apartment, Maya said, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. I live at 422 East Chestnut. The Prescott building. There is a wait. The voice droned. Friday night, freeze warnings, lots of lockouts. How long? 2 hours? Minimum? Maya looked down at her grocery bag. The milk was going to freeze before she got inside. 2 hours. And the rate, she asked, dreading the answer. Emergency call-out is $150, plus labor, plus parts if we have to drill. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. $150. That was her grocery budget for the next 2 weeks. That was the electric bill sitting on her counter. She looked at her phone screen. 3%. I will call you back, she whispered, and ended the call. She could not afford it. It was a simple, brutal math equation. She could not afford to get into her own home. Defeated. She sank down onto the bottom step of the entryway stairs. The heater in the vestibule had been broken since November, so it was only marginally warmer than the street outside. The tile floor seeped cold through her jeans instantly. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her thin thrift store coat tighter around herself. It was a vintage wool blend that looked chic but offered about as much insulation as a paper napkin. She would wait. Maybe a neighbor would come in. Maybe Mr. Henderson would check his messages. Maybe she would just turn into an ice sculpture and they could put her in the lobby as decoration. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. The cold began to settle into her marrow. She buried her nose in her scarf, trying to recycle her own body heat. The silence of the building was heavy, broken only by the distant rattle of the old elevator descending. Clank, whir, clank. Maya did not look up. She just wanted to disappear. The elevator doors groaned open, followed by the sharp, rhythmic click of dress shoes on the tile, not the shuffling of Mrs. Gable from 3B or the heavy boots of the construction worker in 2A. These were hard, precise steps. She lifted her head. 3 men were walking toward the exit. The 2 on the outside were large, physically dense men in dark suits that strained slightly at the shoulders. They moved with a practiced alertness, their eyes scanning the vestibule, the street outside, and finally, The girl huddled on the stairs. But it was the man in the center who drew the air out of the room. He was tall, wearing a charcoal overcoat that fit him so perfectly it looked like it had been sewn onto his body. His dark hair was swept back, severe and neat. He had the kind of face that belonged on a Roman coin, sharp angles, a strong jaw, and eyes that were dark and unreadable. Adrian Russo, the man from the penthouse. Maya had seen him maybe 3 times in the 2 years she had lived here. He was a ghost story in the building. The tenants whispered about him in the laundry room. They said he bought the entire top floor in cash. They said he put in soundproofing so thick you could scream and no one would hear. They said he was connected. A polite Grey Ridge euphemism for organized crime. He stopped. The 2 men flanking him stopped instantly, like extensions of his own body. One of them, a man with a nose that looked like it had been broken twice, shifted his weight to block Maya's path to the door, though she hadn't moved an inch. Adrian looked down at her. His expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was completely neutral, like a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "Is there a problem?" he asked. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and terrifyingly calm. It wasn't the voice of a man who lived in a building with a broken heater and peeling paint. Maya scrambled to stand up, her legs numb and clumsy. She grabbed her grocery bag, feeling ridiculous. She was 5'4" of exhausted architect facing a wall of muscle and money. "No problem," she managed, her voice shaking from the shivering. "Just camping." The bodyguard on the left frowned, confused. Adrian did not blink. He looked at her red cheeks, her trembling hands, and the grocery bag resting in a puddle of melted slush on the floor. "You are locked out," he stated. It wasn't a question. Maya let out a short, breathy laugh that turned into a cloud of vapor. "Brilliant deduction, Sherlock." "I am waiting for the locksmith," she said, hugging her arms across her chest. "Or hypothermia, whichever comes first." Adrian glanced at the glass door, where the wind was currently rattling the frame, then looked back at her. He studied her face for a second too long, making heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How long?" he asked. "They said 2 hours," Maya admitted, her teeth chattering on the last word. Adrian turned his head slightly to the bodyguard on his right. The man immediately stepped forward, pulling out a phone. "Call it off," Adrian said quietly. "The locksmith?" the guard asked. "The dinner," Adrian corrected. "Tell them something came up. We will reschedule." The guard hesitated, his eyes flicking to Maya and then back to his boss. "Boss, the meeting is with the Vanzetti brothers. They have been waiting 3 weeks. I said reschedule," Adrian said. His tone didn't change, didn't get louder, but the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The guard nodded once. Brisk and professional. "Yes, sir." Adrian turned back to Maya. He unbuttoned his coat. Just one button, a gesture that somehow made him seem less like a statue and more like a human being. "Go upstairs," he said. Maya blinked, her brain moving sluggishly in the cold. "What?" "My apartment," he said, gesturing toward the elevator with a gloved hand. "It is warm. You can wait there until the locksmith comes." Maya's survival instincts, usually dormant during her day job of drafting floor plans and arguing about grout colors, suddenly woke up and started screaming. You do not go into the penthouse of a man who walks around with bodyguards. You do not go into a secondary location with a stranger who looks like he could order a hit as easily as he orders pizza. "No. Thank you," she said, taking a small step back. "I am fine. Really, I have layers." She gestured to her coat. It was a lie. She was freezing to death. Her toes had stopped hurting 10 minutes ago, which she knew was a bad sign. Adrian looked at her boots, soaked through from the slush, and then at her blue-tinged lips. "You are shaking," he observed dryly. "And this hallway is 30 degrees. If you stay here for 2 hours, you will be sick." "I have a strong immune system," Maya countered, though the effect was ruined when her body convulsed in a violent shiver. Adrian sighed, a short, impatient sound through his nose. He looked at the 2 men behind him. "Wait in the car," he ordered. "Boss," the second guard started to protest. "The car," Adrian repeated. "Give me an hour. I will text you when she is inside her unit." The bodyguards looked unhappy. They glared at Maya as if she were a concealed weapon, but they didn't argue. They walked past her, pushing through the heavy front doors and vanishing into the swirling snow. Suddenly, the hallway felt very empty. Just Maya, Adrian, and the hum of the vending machine in the corner. "I am not going to hurt you," Adrian said. He sounded almost bored by the idea, which was strangely comforting. "I am just offering you a place to sit where the air does not hurt your face." Maya looked at him. Really looked at him. Beneath the terrifying exterior and the rumors, he looked tired. There were fine lines around his eyes that the dim hallway light accentuated, and he was standing there, holding the elevator door open with his hand, waiting. Instincts or frostbite, she thought grimly. "Okay," she said, her voice small, "but I am staying right by the door, and as soon as the locksmith calls, I am gone." "Agreed," Adrian said. He stepped back to let her enter the elevator first. Maya shuffled in, clutching her groceries like a shield. The ride up was excruciatingly silent. The elevator in the Prescott building smelled like old dust and lemon cleaner. Adrian took up too much space in the small metal box. He didn't look at her, staring straight ahead at the inspection certificate, but Maya could feel his presence like a static charge. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, Maya gasped softly. She knew the layout of this building. She was an architect. She knew the bones of the place. But the hallway outside the penthouse had been transformed. The peeling wallpaper was gone, replaced by smooth, dark wood paneling. The lighting was recessed and warm. Adrian unlocked the double doors at the end of the hall and pushed them open. "After you," Maya stepped inside and stopped dead. The contrast was physical, like walking from a black and white movie into high-definition color. The apartment was massive. The walls that separated the cramped rooms in her unit downstairs had been blown out to create a sprawling open-concept living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the entire far wall, offering a panoramic view of Grey Ridge. From up here, the grim, dirty city looked like a jewelry box of glittering lights against the velvet darkness. The floors were polished concrete, softened by plush. Dark rugs, a sleek, low-profile sofa dominated the center of the room, facing a fireplace that crackled with gas flames. Jazz played softly from hidden speakers, something slow, mournful, and expensive. It smelled of cedar, leather, and rain. Maya stood on the entryway mat, water dripping from her boots. She felt incredibly small and incredibly shabby. Her coat was pilling at the sleeves. Her jeans had a stain on the knee from where she had dropped a marker earlier. She was a smudge of mess in a pristine world. "You can put the bag on the counter," Adrian said, walking past her. He moved with a quiet grace, shedding his heavy coat and draping it over the back of a chair. Underneath, he wore a black dress shirt, the top button undone, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, exposing a sleek silver watch. Maya tiptoed onto the concrete, terrified of leaving a track. She set her grocery bag on the kitchen island, which was a slab of black marble the size of her entire bathroom. "This place," she murmured, looking around, "the architecture. Did you reinforce the structural beams to open it up like this? The load-bearing walls in this building are usually central." Adrian paused, looking back at her with a flicker of surprise. "Yes," he said. "We had to install steel columns. Most people just notice the view." "I am an architect," she said, unwinding her scarf. Well, a junior architect. I notice beams." She finally took a deep breath, the warmth of the room seeping into her frozen skin. It felt like heaven. Her fingers started to tingle painfully as the circulation returned. Adrian walked to a wine rack built into the wall. He pulled out a bottle of red and 2 glasses. "To warm up," he said, pouring. "Oh, no, I could not," Maya started automatically. "I am just imposing." "I do not want to." "Drink the wine," Adrian said gently. He slid a glass across the marble island toward her. "You look like a ghost. It will help." Maya hesitated. Her mother's voice was in her head, warning her about accepting drinks from strange men. But then she looked at Adrian. He was pouring a glass for himself, his focus entirely on the liquid. He wasn't leering, he wasn't trying to charm her. He was just a man having a drink in his kitchen. She picked up the glass. "Thank you." She took a sip. It was rich, velvety, and tasted like berries and smoke. It was undoubtedly the most expensive thing she had ever consumed. Adrian leaned his hip against the counter opposite her, swirling his glass. He watched her over the rim. "So, Maya Collins," he said. She choked slightly on the wine. "You know my name? It is on the mailbox in the lobby," he said effortlessly. 422 M. Collins. Right, of course. She took another large gulp of wine to hide her embarrassment. The alcohol hit her empty stomach almost instantly, loosening the knot of anxiety that had been tight in her chest since she reached for her missing keys. "So, do you always stand guard in hallways?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could filter it. "Or was I just lucky?" Adrian's mouth quirked at the corner, a microscopic smile. "I was leaving. You were simply in the way." "Charming," she said, the warmth making her bold. "I will have you know the hallway is a very exclusive neighborhood, great ventilation, drafty," he corrected, historic charm. She parried. He actually chuckled then, a low, rusty sound, as if he didn't use it often. He took a sip of his wine, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Why the architecture?" he asked. Maya shrugged, wrapping her hands around the bowl of the wine glass to warm her palms. "I like the idea of building things that last, making order out of chaos. Plus, I thought it would make me rich." "And," Adrian asked, glancing at her thrift store coat, "and now I have $80,000 in student loans, and I designed guest bathrooms for women who think subway tile is a political statement," she said dryly. She bit her lip. Why was she telling him this? There was something about him, his stillness, his silence, that acted like a vacuum, pulling words out of her. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting. "What do you do? Besides intimidate people in elevators?" "I am in logistics," Adrian said vaguely. "Logistics," Maya repeated. "Like shipping, something like that, moving things, managing assets, ensuring agreements are honored." It was a non-answer, smooth and practiced. Maya looked at him. The expensive watch, the shadowed eyes, the bodyguards downstairs. "You mean you are a mobster," she thought. "You mean you are a businessman?" she said aloud. Adrian tilted his head. "We can go with that." They stood in silence for a moment. But it wasn't the awkward silence of the elevator. It was a comfortable, heavy silence. The wind howled against the glass, battering the windows, but inside it was warm and still. Maya felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. The adrenaline of the lockout was fading, leaving her drained. She slumped slightly against the counter. "Long week?" Adrian asked softly. "You have no idea," she sighed, staring into her wine. "My mother called 3 times today. Her medication costs went up again, so I had to transfer half my rent money to her account in Ohio. Then my credit card was declined at the grocery store because my ex-boyfriend, who, for the record, I broke up with 2 years ago, apparently memorized my new number and bought a $500 gaming chair. And now, the keys." She stopped, horrified. She had just dumped her entire pathetic life story onto a man who looked like he wore suits worth more than her college education. "I am sorry," she stammered, straightening up. "I am rambling. You do not need to hear my sob story." "I am usually very professional. I am a delight. Actually, ask anyone." Adrian did not look annoyed. He looked focused. He set his wine glass down and took a step closer to the island. "He used your card?" Adrian asked. His voice was quiet, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it now. "Yeah," Maya muttered, looking down at the marble. "He is a jerk. It is fine. I will dispute it. It just takes time." Adrian made a hum of acknowledgement, but his eyes were dark. He looked at her, at the fraying collar of her shirt, the tired shadows under her eyes, the defiant set of her chin. "You are very honest, Maya," he said. "It is a flaw," she admitted. "I have no filter when I am cold. No," he said, "it is rare." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the marble. He was close now. Maya could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something crisp, like winter air. She stopped breathing for a second. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, unexpected voltage. Maya looked up, locking eyes with him. Up close. His eyes were not just black. They were a deep, dark brown, flecked with gold near the pupil. They were intense, searching her face with a hunger he immediately tried to hide. She felt a pull, a magnetic drag toward him that made no sense. He was dangerous. He was a stranger. And yet, she wanted to lean across the counter. Adrian's gaze dropped to her mouth. Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. He reached out a hand. Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. She expected him to touch her cheek, to brush her hair back, her body tensed, half in fear, half in anticipation. But he stopped. His hand hovered inches from her face, fingers curled inward. He didn't touch her. He wouldn't You have... He started, his voice rougher than before. He gestured vaguely toward her face. There is a hair, he said softly. Stuck to your lip. Maya blinked, the spell shattering like dropped glass. Oh. She reached up quickly, brushing the stray strand away. Her face burned. She had thought... God, what had she thought? That the Mafia prince was going to kiss the soaking wet architect over the kitchen island? She needed to get out. She needed to get out right now. Suddenly, her phone buzzed violently on the countertop, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Maya jumped. She grabbed the phone. "It is the locksmith," she said, her voice high and breathless. Adrian straightened up, the mask of indifference sliding back into place instantly. The intense, heated moment evaporated, as if it had never happened. "You should go," he said. "Yes," Maya said. She grabbed her scarf, jamming it into her pocket. "Thank you for the warmth and the wine. Take the groceries." Adrian said, "Right, the groceries." Maya grabbed the plastic bag. She backed toward the door, feeling clumsy and foolish. "Goodbye, Adrian," she said. "Good night, Maya." She turned and fled. She walked fast down the hallway, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't look back, but as the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the penthouse, she could have sworn she still felt his eyes on her, heavy and warm, following her all the way down. The fluorescent lights of the architecture firm hummed with a sound that usually blended into the background, a white noise of productivity and deadline stress today. However, it sounded like a drill boring directly into Maya's skull. She sat at her desk, the glow of her computer monitor illuminating a half-finished schematic for a powder room renovation in the suburbs. The client wanted imported marble and gold fixtures. Maya had spent 20 minutes staring at the layout, but she was not seeing tiles or measurements. She was seeing the reflection of city lights in a wall of glass. She was seeing a hand, strong and manicured, holding a wine glass by the stem. She was hearing a voice, deep and calm, asking her about her student loans as if they were discussing the weather. Maya blinked hard, forcing her eyes back to the CAD software. "Focus," she scolded herself silently. "You are losing your mind over a man who probably forgot your name the moment the elevator doors closed." But she knew that was not true. He had known her name before she even introduced herself. Collins, 422. She picked up her coffee mug, which contained lukewarm, office-grade sludge, and took a sip. The memory of the wine from the night before, rich, velvety, tasting of dark fruit and expensive wood, ghosted over her tongue, making the coffee taste even worse. It was ridiculous. She was a junior architect, drowning in debt, wearing boots she had resold twice. Adrian Russo was whatever he was. Logistics. Organized crime. A kingpin. A man who wore suits that cost more than her car. He was out of her league. He was not even in the same sport. He was on a different planet, orbiting a sun made of money and danger. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she felt that phantom moment of closeness in his kitchen. The way he had leaned in. The way he had pointed out the strand of hair on her lip without touching her. A restraint that felt more intimate than a caress. Maya shook her head, physically trying to dislodge the thought. She typed a command into her keyboard, deleting a wall that didn't need to be deleted, just to feel like she was doing something. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, The winter sky outside was already pitch black. Maya packed her bag, wrapped her thin scarf 3 times around her neck, and headed out into the biting wind of Grey Ridge. The city was busy, a gridlock of honking taxis and pedestrians rushing toward the subway. Maya kept her head down, fighting the wind. As she turned the corner onto her street, the crowd thinned out. The streetlights here were yellow and buzzing, casting long, strange shadows against the brick buildings. She slowed down. Half a block from her apartment building, a black sedan was idling at the curb. It was sleek, polished, and completely out of place among the dented hatchbacks and rusted vans that usually populated her neighborhood. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. Maya stopped. A prickle of unease danced down her spine. "You are being paranoid," she told herself. "It is just a car. Maybe a drug dealer, maybe an Uber. It has nothing to do with you." She forced her feet to move, gripping the strap of her bag tighter. As she walked past the sedan, keeping a wide berth, the rear window rolled down an inch. Smoke curled out. She glanced over. Just a quick flicker of her eyes, leaning against the hood of the car, previously blended into the shadows, was a man. He was wearing a heavy peacoat, collar turned up. His nose was crooked, bent slightly to the left, a break that had healed badly. It was the bodyguard, the one from the vestibule, the one Adrian had dismissed the night before. He was not looking at his phone. He was not looking at the traffic. He was looking directly at her. Maya's breath hitched. She averted her gaze instantly, staring straight ahead at her building's front door, and walked faster. Her boots slammed against the pavement. She keyed into the lobby with trembling fingers, half expecting a heavy hand to land on her shoulder. But no one stopped her. She practically threw herself inside, waiting for the heavy click of the lock before she exhaled. He was watching her, or having her watched. Why? Because she had seen the penthouse? Because she had drunk his wine? Did he think she was going to go to the police and report what? That he had good taste in furniture? She took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing to burn off the adrenaline. By the time she reached the 4th floor, her legs were burning and her lungs were heaving. She marched down the hallway to apartment 422. She stopped. Lying on the floor, half slipped under her door, was a small, cream-colored envelope. Maya stared at it. It looked heavy. Expensive paper. She unlocked her door, scooped up the envelope, and locked herself inside her apartment before opening it. Her apartment was freezing. She kept the heat low to save money. She didn't take off her coat. She just stood in the middle of her tiny living room, under the flickering ceiling light, and tore the seal. There was no letterhead, just a single index card with handwriting that was sharp, angular, and aggressive. For the locksmith bill. Considerate interest on last night's conversation. Amaya frowned. She reached into the envelope and pulled out the contents. Cash. New bills. Crisp. Clean. And smelling faintly of that same cedar and rain scent she had noticed in the penthouse. She counted it, $20, $40, $60, $150. Exactly. Not a penny more. Not a penny less. Maya stared at the money in her hand. A mix of emotions swirled in her chest. Relief, because she truly needed this money. Shame, because she hated needing it. And then, a sharp, hot flare of indignation. She was poor. Yes, she was struggling. Yes, but she was not a beggar. And she was certainly not on Adrian Russo's payroll. He had given her wine and warmth. That was kindness. This felt like a transaction. It felt like he was paying her for her time, or worse, paying for her silence. Interest on the conversation? What did that even mean? She gritted her teeth. She marched into her bedroom, grabbed her spare cash stash, 4 crumpled dollar bills, and shoved them into her pocket, just in case. Then she shoved the $150 back into the envelope. "No," she said aloud to the empty room. "Absolutely not." She turned around and walked back out the door. She didn't give herself time to overthink it. She didn't let herself imagine the bodyguards or the scary reputation. She just focused on the insult to her pride. She marched to the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor. The ride up felt faster this time. When the doors opened to the private hallway, The air was different. Last night, it had been quiet. Tonight, there was a tension vibrating in the walls. As Maya approached the double doors of the penthouse, she heard voices. They were not the smooth, calm tones she remembered. These were raised, angry. Territory is not up for negotiation. Marco. The voice was Adrian's, but it was unrecognizable. It was cold, hard, and sounded like steel grinding against stone. Another voice answered, lower and rougher, speaking rapidly. Maya caught words, but the language shifted mid-sentence. Italian, fast, furious Italian. We cannot hold the shipments if the port is watched. The other voice shouted, switching back to English, they are sending a message. Adrian, a body in the harbor is a message. Maya froze, her hand hovering inches from the wood of the door. Shipments, bodies, harbor. The reality of who Adrian was crashed into her indignation like a freight train. This wasn't a romance novel where the bad boy was just misunderstood. This was real crime. This was violence. She took a step back, her courage dissolving into cold fear. She should just leave the envelope on the mat. She should run. Suddenly, the shouting stopped. There was a moment of heavy silence, and then the sound of a lock tumbling. Maya gasped and scrambled backward, but she wasn't fast enough. The heavy door swung open. She nearly collided with a wall of black wool. Adrian stood in the doorway. He looked furious. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly chaotic, and his eyes were blazing with a dark, terrifying intensity. Behind him, inside the apartment, 3 men were standing around the kitchen island, the same island where she had sat. They looked up, their faces hard and suspicious. One of them had a hand resting near his waistband. The air in the hallway froze. Adrian looked down. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. The fury didn't vanish, but it shifted, halted by confusion. Maya? He said. His voice was rough, darker than she had ever heard it. Maya stood there, clutching the cream envelope like a weapon. She felt the eyes of the men behind him drilling into her. She saw the gun holster peeking out from the jacket of the man nearest the door. She stammered. I came to return this. She held up the envelope. Her hand was shaking. Adrian stared at the envelope, then at her face. He saw the fear in her eyes. He glanced back over his shoulder at the men in his living room. Out. He ordered them. The single word was low, but it cracked like a whip. Use the service elevator, now. The men didn't argue. They grabbed their coats and moved toward a side door Maya hadn't noticed before. Adrian stepped out into the hallway and pulled the front door shut behind him, cutting off the view of the penthouse. He stood close to her, effectively blocking her from the world he had just hidden. What are you doing here? He asked. His voice was quieter now, but tight. Maya took a breath, trying to summon the anger she had felt in her living room, but it was hard when her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. You left this under my door, she said, thrusting the envelope toward his chest. I do not want it. Adrian looked at the envelope, but he didn't take it. It is for the locksmith. He said, You said it was $150. I can pay my own bills, Maya said, her voice trembling slightly. I did not ask for your help. I drank your wine because I was cold, not because I was looking for a handout. Adrian sighed, a long exhale that seemed to drain some of the tension from his shoulders. He looked exhausted, up close. Maya could see the stress etched into the corners of his mouth. It is not a handout, Maya, he said softly. Then what is it? It is me making sure you do not starve because you were too proud to ask for help, he said. He took a step closer. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked unnervingly like concern. I heard you on the phone last night. He said, I heard you say you couldn't afford it. I heard you say you would have to wait. Maya flushed, shame heating her neck. You were eavesdropping? I noticed things, he corrected. Take the money. Maya. No. Please, he said. He reached out, his hand covering hers where she gripped the envelope. His fingers were warm. The touch sent a shockwave up her arm that made her knees feel weak. You should not have to choose between food and getting into your own home, he said. His voice was low, intimate, and completely at odds with the violent conversation she had just overheard. Keep it. Burn it if you want, but do not give it back to me. Maya looked up at him. She saw the conflict in his face, the hardness of the boss who ordered men around, warring with the man who was currently pleading with her to accept cash for groceries. "I heard you," she whispered. "Just now, before you opened the door." Adrian went very still. His hand tightened slightly over hers. "What did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "Shipments, messages." She pulled her hand away from his, leaving the envelope in her own palm. She took a step back, putting distance between them. "I do not want to be part of this. Adrian," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Whatever this is, I am just an architect. I go to work. I come home. I pay my bills. I do not want to know about territories or bodies." Adrian watched her. His face was unreadable again, the mask back in place. "You are right," he said. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie to her or tell her she had misunderstood. The honesty was more terrifying than a lie would have been. "You are not part of it," he said firmly, "and I intend to keep it that way. Go downstairs. Maya, lock your door. Keep the money." He turned his back on her and opened his door. For a second, she saw the empty living room, sleek and cold. Then the door clicked shut, and she was alone in the hallway again. The feeling of being watched did not stop. That evening, Maya realized she had no food in the apartment because she had abandoned her groceries in the lobby the night before during the lockout, and by the time she retrieved them, the milk had spoiled. She had to go to the corner bodega. She walked out of the building, her shoulders hunched. The black sedan was there again. It rolled slowly down the street, matching her pace. Maya ignored it, staring straight ahead. She reached the crosswalk and waited for the light to change. The street was busy with the Friday night crowd. "Hey, sweetheart?" The voice was close, wet, and smelled of cheap beer. Maya flinched. A man in a torn jacket had stepped into her personal space, grinning a smile that was missing 2 teeth. "You got $1? Just $1 for a veteran?" he slurred. Stepping closer, reaching out to touch her arm, Maya recoiled. "I do not have any cash. I am sorry." "You have a nice coat, though," the man sneered, his mood shifting instantly. Before Maya could back away, a shadow detached itself from the building wall next to them. It was one of the suits. Not Nico, the one with the broken nose, but the other one, the broad, silent one. From the elevator, he didn't run. He just appeared. He stepped between Maya and the stranger, moving with a speed that was terrifying for a man of his size. He didn't touch the drunk man. He simply stood there, blocking Maya completely, and stared. "Move," the bodyguard said. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat, bored command. He opened his jacket slightly, revealing nothing but the suggestion of something heavy at his waist. The drunk man blinked, his eyes widening as he looked up at the wall of muscle. He sobered up instantly. "Whoa, hey, no trouble, man," he stammered, backing away, hands raised. Just talking, walk," the bodyguard said. The man turned and scurried away, disappearing into the crowd. The bodyguard turned to Maya. He didn't smile. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just nodded once, turned on his heel, and vanished back toward the idling sedan. Maya stood on the corner, her heart racing. She wasn't just being watched, she was being protected, and she wasn't sure which one was worse. She waited in the lobby. She knew he would come home eventually. She sat on one of the uncomfortable mid-century modern chairs near the mailboxes, pretending to read a magazine she had pulled from the recycling bin. It was nearly midnight when the front doors opened. Adrian walked in alone. He looked tired. His coat was unbuttoned, his scarf hanging loose. He was rubbing his temples as if he had a headache that had lasted for a decade. He stopped when he saw her. Maya stood up. She crossed her arms over her chest. "Tell them to stop," she whispered. The lobby was empty, but she felt the need to keep her voice down. Adrian didn't ask what she meant. He walked over to the mailboxes, pulling a small key from his pocket. "Stop what?" he asked, checking his box. It was empty. It was always empty. "Following me," she hissed. "The car, the men, that guy at the bodega. He came out of nowhere like a ninja. I do not want bodyguards. Adrian, I do not want shadows." Adrian closed the small metal door and turned to face her. The lobby light cast deep shadows under his eyes, There was trouble 3 blocks over tonight, he said calmly. A mugging, and 2 break-ins near the subway station. I live in Grey Ridge, she said. There are always muggings. I can handle myself. Can you? He asked. Yes. Then why were you shaking when that man approached you? Maya opened her mouth, then closed it. He had seen that? Or his man had reported it? It is creepy. Adrian, she said, changing tactics. It is invasive. I am not your girlfriend. I am not your employee. I am your neighbor. You have no right to have people trailing me. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. He took a step closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her breath hitch. People who get close to me become targets. Maya, he said quietly. I am not close to you, she argued, though her voice lacked conviction. We shared 1 glass of wine in my world. That is enough, he said. He looked away, staring at the row of brass mailboxes. I noticed you, he said, and if I noticed you, others might notice you too. I wanted to make sure you got home safe. That is all. Maya stared at his profile. He looked isolated, lonely, the master of the penthouse, surrounded by men who followed orders and enemies who wanted him dead. Why? She asked. The word hung in the quiet air. Adrian turned back to her. Why what? Why me? She asked. Why do I matter? I am nobody. I am the girl who gets locked out in the hallway. I am the one with the debt and the bad ex-boyfriend. You have everything. You have an empire. Why do you care if I get home safe? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at her, really looked at her, his dark eyes sweeping over her face. He stepped closer again. He was so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from his coat. He lowered his voice to a murmur that was barely audible over the hum of the vending machine, because, he said, he paused, searching for the words. Because of the way you look at me, he said. Maya frowned, confused. How do I look at you? Like I am a person, he said simply. The words hit her in the chest. Not a threat, he continued, his gaze dropping to her lips and then back up to her eyes. Not a bank account, not a monster, just a man. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. The air between them suddenly felt charged with electricity. Maya felt her heart pounding, a frantic rhythm. She saw the raw honesty in his eyes, stripped of the guarded cynicism he usually wore like armor. He leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. His gaze was intense, magnetic. For a moment, Maya forgot about the bodyguards. She forgot about the shipments and the danger. She just saw a man who was desperate to be seen. Her body swayed toward him instinctively. She wanted to bridge the gap. She wanted to know what he tasted like when he wasn't drinking wine. Then reality crashed back in. People who get close to me become targets. Panic flared in her chest, not of him, but of what he represented. She broke eye contact, stepping back abruptly. Her heel clicked loud on the tile floor. "Good night, Adrian," she said, her voice breathless and shaken. She didn't wait for his response. She pushed past him, heading for the stairs because she couldn't bear to be trapped in the elevator with the memory of his eyes. Adrian stood in the lobby, motionless, watching her go. He didn't follow. He just stood there in the silence, listening to the sound of her footsteps retreating up the stairs, away from him. The sound of dripping water was the first thing Maya noticed when she stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor. It was a rhythmic, relentless plink, plink, plink that echoed off the peeling wallpaper. The second thing she noticed was the smell. It was the heavy, suffocating scent of wet drywall, mildew, and ancient dust that had been disturbed for the first time in decades. Maya stopped in her tracks, her hand tightening around the strap of her work bag. It was Tuesday. Tuesdays were supposed to be boring. Tuesdays were for team meetings and leftover lasagna. Tuesdays were not for aquatic disasters. She walked down the hallway, her boots squelching slightly on the carpet, which was darker than it had been that morning. When she reached her door, she found it open. Mr. Henderson, the superintendent, was standing in the middle of her living room with a shop vacuum that roared like a jet engine. There were 3 buckets arranged in a triangle near the window, and a plastic tarp was draped over her sofa. Maya stood in the doorway, too tired to even drop her bag. "Mr. Henderson," she said loudly over the noise. The super turned around and clicked the vacuum off. The sudden silence was ringing. Pipe burst in the wall. "Mr. Henderson said, wiping his forehead with a rag that looked greasier than his face. "Third floor got it worse, but you have got standing water in the bedroom closet." Maya closed her eyes. Her shoes, her winter coats, her sketches. "Is the water off?" she asked, dread settling in her stomach like a stone. "Building wide," Henderson said. "Had to kill the main line. It is going to be a few hours, maybe all night. The pipes in this place are older than my grandmother." Maya looked at the buckets. She looked at the wet patch spreading across her ceiling like a bruised map of the world. She wanted to cry, but she was too dehydrated and too exhausted. "I called the emergency plumbers," Henderson added, gesturing to the hallway. "They are on their way. Expensive crew, the ones who actually show up." Maya frowned. "Mr. Henderson usually fixed things himself with duct tape and prayer. He never called the expensive crew. The building management approved that?" she asked skeptically. Henderson looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, glancing up at the ceiling. "Not exactly. Mr. Russo upstairs called them." Maya stiffened. "Of course he did. He came down when the water pressure dropped." Henderson explained, "Saw the mess. Told me to get the best guys in the city and send the bill to the Penthouse. Said he would cover half the cost if it meant the water was back on before midnight." Maya felt a complicated knot of emotions tighten in her chest. On one hand, she was grateful. Without Adrian, she would probably be bailing water with a coffee mug until dawn while Henderson looked for his wrench. On the other hand, it was another intervention. Another envelope of cash slid under the door of her life. He was everywhere. He was the reason she had groceries. He was the reason the creepy guy at the bodega didn't talk to her anymore. And now, he was the reason her apartment was being rescued. It made her feel small. It made her feel indebted. "I am going to be in the way here, aren't I?" she asked quietly. Henderson nodded sympathetically. "It is going to get loud. Miss Collins, they have to cut through the drywall in your closet to get to the junction." "Honestly, you might want to find somewhere else to be for a few hours." Maya sighed. She walked into her bedroom, stepping carefully over the wet spots on the rug. Her closet was a disaster zone. Her clothes were dampened by the humidity. Her shoes huddled in a dry corner. She grabbed a few essentials, a change of clothes, her toothbrush, a book, and stuffed them into her bag. She retreated to the hallway, leaving Henderson to his buckets. She stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. A coffee shop? They all closed at 10. A hotel? She didn't have the money for a last-minute booking in Grey Ridge. As she hesitated, the elevator dinged. The door slid open and Adrian stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a tailored suit. He was wearing dark jeans and a black sweater that looked soft and expensive. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who had been interrupted in the middle of a quiet evening. He saw her immediately. He walked down the hall, his eyes scanning the open door of her apartment and the defeated posture of her shoulders. "Henderson says it is bad," Adrian said. No greeting, just the facts. Maya looked up at him. She was too tired to be defensive. "It is a mess," she admitted. "They have to cut the wall open. I know," he said. "The plumbers are parking out front. It is going to be loud." Maya, "Drills, saws, I know," she repeated. "I was just figuring out where to go." Adrian put his hands in his pockets. He stood comfortably in the dingy hallway, looking completely out of place, and yet entirely in command of the space. "Come upstairs," he said. Maya shook her head instinctively. No, thank you. I cannot keep doing this." "Adrian, I cannot keep running to your penthouse every time life gets hard. It is not running," he said calmly. "It is logic. You have nowhere to sleep. I have a guest room that is currently gathering dust. It has a lock on the door. It has its own bathroom. And the water works." Maya bit her lip. The offer was tempting. God, it was tempting. A hot shower, a quiet room. But it felt like crossing a line she might not be able to uncross. "I really shouldn't," she said weaky. Adrian watched her face. He didn't push. He didn't bully. He just waited, giving her the space to decide. Before she could answer, a door down the hall opened. It was apartment 4C. A man leaned out, Pete, a guy in his 40s who always smelled like stale tobacco and stared at Maya's legs when she collected her mail. He held a beer can in one hand, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk that made Maya's skin crawl. Water trouble. Huh? Pete called out, his voice loud and slurred. Maya stiffened, not looking at him. Just a burst pipe. Pete. Pete's eyes flicked to Adrian, then back to Maya. He let out a short, ugly laugh. Moving on up, are we? He sneered. I guess that is one way to pay the rent. Sleeping where the money is. Smart girl. The air in the hallway changed instantly. Maya felt the heat of humiliation rise up her neck. It was a crude, nasty comment, the kind of thing she usually ignored. But tonight, exhausted and vulnerable, it felt like a slap. Beside her, Adrian went very still. It wasn't the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of a predator right before it strikes. He turned his head slowly toward Pete. His expression didn't change. He didn't scowl. He didn't snarl, but his eyes went completely dead. Go inside, Adrian said. His voice was terrifyingly soft. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an absolute reality. Pete blinked. The smirk faltered. He looked at Adrian, really looked at the set of his shoulders, the dark void of his eyes, and his survival instinct kicked in. He swallowed hard, stepped back, and slammed his door shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly a second later. Maya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She was trembling, but not from the cold. She looked at Adrian. He was scary. There was no denying that. He could silence a room with a look. He carried violence in his pocket like loose change, but he had never directed it at her, not once. When he looked at her, he wasn't looking at a girl. He wasn't looking at an object. He was looking at her. In a building full of creepy neighbors and failing plumbing, the man who ran a crime syndicate was the only person who made her feel safe. Okay, she whispered. Adrian turned back to her. The darkness vanished from his eyes as if he had flipped a switch, replaced by that same guarded concern. Okay, he asked. Just for tonight, Maya said, gripping her bag. Because of the noise. Just for tonight, he agreed. He reached out and took her bag from her shoulder. He didn't ask. He just took the weight so she didn't have to carry it. Let us go, he said. The guest room in the penthouse was bigger than Maya's entire apartment. It was decorated in the same style as the rest of Adrian's home, minimalist, expensive, and soothingly neutral. The bed was a cloud of white linen. The windows offered a view of the city skyline that made Grey Ridge look almost romantic. Adrian stood in the doorway while Maya looked around. Towels are in the bathroom, he said, pointing to a door on the left. Fresh sheets. If you need anything else. I am down the hall. Maya sat on the edge of the bed. She felt grimy from the day, covered in the invisible film of stress and plaster dust. Thank you, Adrian, she said softly. Really? He nodded once, accepting the thanks without pretense. You look like you need comfortable clothes, he noted, looking at her damp jeans. Your bag feels light. I assume you didn't pack pajamas. I packed a toothbrush and a book, she admitted. I wasn't thinking clearly. Wait here. He disappeared into the hallway. He returned a moment later, holding a folded stack of fabric. They will be big, he said, handing them to her. But they are clean. Maya unfolded them. A soft gray t-shirt and a pair of black sweatpants. They smelled like him, cedar and rain. She waited for him to leave, but he lingered for a second, his hand on the doorknob. Locking the door is for your comfort, not mine, he said quietly. You are safe here, Maya, with or without a lock. He closed the door before she could answer. Maya changed quickly. The t-shirt hung to her mid-thigh, and she had to roll the waistband of the sweatpants 3 times to keep them from falling down. She looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up, but the fabric was softer than anything she owned. When she walked out into the living room 20 minutes later, scrubbed clean and barefoot, Adrian was in the kitchen. He had set out takeout containers on the island. The smell of sesame oil and soy sauce filled the air. replacing the memory of the mildew downstairs. "I took a guess," he said, glancing at her. "Spicy beef?" "You guessed right," she said, pulling at the hem of the oversized shirt. Adrian's eyes swept over her briefly. He saw the way the shirt swallowed her frame, the way her hair was damp and curling around her face. He didn't leer. He didn't make a joke. He politely averted his gaze, turning back to the wine he was pouring, giving her the dignity of not being stared at. "Eat," he said. "You look like you haven't eaten since breakfast." They moved to the couch. It was strange, sitting there with him. The last time she was here, she had been an intruder. Now, she was a guest. He turned on the television, finding an old black and white movie on a classic channel. It was a detective noir, shadows and rain and fast-talking dames. It felt appropriate. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the clinking of forks and the dialogue from the TV. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was companionable. "So," Maya asked, stabbing a piece of broccoli, "where did you grow up? I know you are from Grey Ridge, but which part?" "The Heights," Adrian said. Maya paused. The Heights was a rough neighborhood now, but 20 years ago, it had been a war zone. That was intense. She said, "It was loud," Adrian corrected. He took a sip of wine. "Crowded. My father was a dock worker who gambled. My mother was a saint who cried a lot. I learned early that if you wanted quiet, you had to buy it, or take it." Maya looked at him. He was staring at the TV screen, his profile sharp against the flickering light. "I grew up in a town called Oak Haven." She said, "In Ohio. We had one traffic light. The biggest scandal I ever saw was when the librarian eloped with the butcher." Adrian huffed a small laugh. "Sounds peaceful." "It was boring," she countered. "I used to sit on my roof and watch the planes fly over. I wanted to be on one so bad. I wanted tall buildings and noise and energy. I wanted to matter." Adrian turned his head to look at her. "You matter, Maya." "Not like you," she said. "You change the weather in a room just by walking into it. People move out of your way. Fear and respect are not the same thing as mattering," Adrian said darkly. "I built all of this." He gestured to the penthouse, the city below, because I thought it would make me feel safe. I thought if I was the one holding the leash, the dog couldn't bite me. "And?" Maya asked softly. "Does it work?" Adrian looked at her. His eyes were unguarded for the first time. "No," he admitted. "It just means you have to stay awake to hold the leash." Maya felt a pang of sorrow for him. He lived in a golden cage that he had built himself, bar by bar. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. Thunder cracked outside, a loud, booming sound that shook the glass walls. The storm that had been threatening all evening had finally broken. The TV died. The city lights below flickered and vanished in patches. Maya gasped, startling at the sudden pitch black. "It is okay," Adrian's voice came from the darkness, calm and steady. "Just a grid failure. The generators will kick in." A flash of lightning illuminated the room in stark blue-white light. In the brief flash, Maya saw Adrian sitting close to her. Without thinking, she reached out. Her hand found his in the dark. His reaction was instant. His fingers closed around hers, warm, large, and solid. He didn't pull away. He held on tight. An anchor in the sudden storm. For 10 seconds, they sat in the absolute dark, listening to the rain lash against the windows. Maya could hear his breathing. She could feel the pulse in his wrist where her thumb rested. Then, the lights flickered back on. The recessed lighting glowed soft gold. The TV hummed back to life. They didn't let go. Maya looked down at their hands. Her pale fingers were laced through his darker ones. Her hand looked small and fragile in his grip, but he wasn't crushing her. He was holding her like she was something precious. She looked up. Adrian was watching her. The air in the room had changed. The easy companionship was gone, replaced by a thick, heavy tension that made it hard to breathe. Adrian shifted on the couch. He turned his body fully toward her. He didn't release her hand. Instead, he used the connection to draw her slightly closer. "Maya," he murmured. He reached up with his free hand. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, barely grazing her skin, but it sent a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. His hand lingered on the side of her neck. His thumb brushed her jawline. His skin was rough, calloused, the hands of a man who had worked, who had fought, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Maya's breath hitched in her throat. She stared at his mouth. Adrian froze. He saw where she was looking. He saw the dilation of her pupils. "Stop me," he whispered. His voice was rough, strained. "Tell me to stop, Maya." "Because I cannot stop myself." Maya's heart was hammering against her ribs like a drum. She thought of the danger. She thought of the men with guns. She thought of the shipments and the violence. Then she thought of the way he had defended her. She thought of the hot water. She thought of the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. She didn't want him to stop. She leaned in. It was a small movement, just inches, but it closed the distance. She pressed her lips to his. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. Adrian went rigid for a heartbeat, as if he couldn't believe she was actually doing it. Then, a low sound rumbled in his chest, half groan, half surrender. He kissed her back. It wasn't the aggressive, demanding kiss she might have expected from a man like him. It was slow. It was drowning. He tilted his head, deepening the contact, his mouth moving over hers with a hunger that he had been suppressing for days. Maya let out a soft sigh, her lips parting. Adrian took the invitation. The kiss grew warmer, heavier. His tongue swept into her mouth, tasting her, claiming her. His hand on her neck slid around to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her damp hair, holding her steady. His other hand released hers and slid down to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. Maya could feel the hard wall of his chest through the thin fabric of the t-shirt. She brought her hands up, resting them on his shoulders, then sliding them up to curl around his neck. His hair was soft under her fingers. The world outside, the storm, the burst pipe, the debt, dissolved. There was only this, the heat of his body, the scent of cedar and rain, the rough slide of his jaw against hers. He shifted, pulling her so that she was practically in his lap. Her legs tangled with his. He groaned into her mouth, a sound of pure need that made her toes curl. His hand roamed over the curve of her waist, his thumb tracing the line of her hip bone through the sweatpants, possessing but never crossing the line into disrespect. It felt dangerous. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing you wanted to jump. They broke apart slowly. Lingering in the space between, their foreheads rested against each other. Maya's breathing was ragged. Her lips felt swollen and sensitive. She opened her eyes. Adrian was watching her, his eyes dark and blown wide, his expression raw. "Adrian," she whispered. She swallowed hard, trying to find her voice in the haze of desire. "I do not do casual," she said. Her voice shook. "I cannot be just a distraction. I cannot be a complication that you visit when you are bored." Adrian brought his hand up to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, tracing the shape of it. "There is nothing casual about this." "Maya," he said. His voice was low, vibrating through her. He looked deep into her eyes, deadly serious. "But you need to know," he said. "I do not want casual either. But loving me, it is not safe. It carries risks, real risks. If you stay, you are stepping into the fire." The words hung heavy in the quiet room. He wasn't promising her flowers and chocolates. He was promising her fire. Maya pulled back slightly. The reality of his warning crashed into the fantasy of the kiss. She looked at his bruised knuckles. She thought of the gun she had seen on his bodyguard. She was falling for him. She knew that now, but falling for him might break her. I need to sleep," she whispered, pulling away from his touch. Adrian let her go. He didn't try to keep her. He sat back, his hands empty, watching her with a mixture of regret and longing. "Good night, Maya," he said. Maya stood up on shaky legs. She walked to the guest room door, touching her fingers to her lips, which still tingled with the ghost of his kiss. She went inside and closed the door, turning the lock with a click that sounded incredibly loud. She leaned against the wood, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She was safe in his apartment, but her heart was in terrible danger. And she wasn't sure if she wanted to be rescued. The days that followed the storm were defined by a strange, quiet electricity that seemed to hum beneath the surface of Maya's life. It was a rhythm that belonged only to her and Adrian, a secret language spoken in the transient spaces between their two very different worlds. It started with coffee. On Wednesday morning, Maya stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, buttoning her coat against the draft, only to find Adrian standing near the mailboxes. He was flanked by Nico, his usual shadow, but when he saw her, he stepped away from his guard. He held out a paper cup from the expensive cafe 3 blocks away, the one Maya loved but rarely splurged on. Black. 2 sugars, he said quietly. Maya took the cup, her fingers brushing against his warm gloves. "Thank you. Have a good day." Maya, that was it. No long conversations, no public displays, just a warm cup of coffee and a lingering look that made her knees feel weak all the way to the subway station. By Thursday, the rhythm had evolved into late-night texts. "Safe." He would message at 10 o'clock. "Safe." She would reply from her bed, staring at the screen. "How was your day?" "Long. Complicated. Better now." It was a fragile thing, this undefined relationship. It existed in the 30 seconds of an elevator ride where they stood close enough to feel each other's body heat, the air thick with unspoken desire, only to step apart the moment the doors opened. It existed in the way he would hold the door for her, his hand resting briefly on the small of her back, a touch that claimed her without anyone else noticing. At her office, the change in Maya did not go unnoticed. On Friday afternoon, Sarah, the senior drafter who usually only spoke to Maya to criticize her render times, leaned over the partition of Maya's cubicle. "New blouse?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Maya looked down at the silk top she was wearing. It was a soft cream color, something she had bought on impulse with the money Adrian had forced her to keep for the locksmith. "It is old," Maya lied smoothly, turning back to her computer. "Just found it in the back of the closet," Sarah hummed, unconvinced. "You are wearing lipstick, too. And you have been smiling at your phone for 20 minutes. Who is he?" Maya felt a flush creep up her neck. "There is no he." "Please," Sarah scoffed. "You have the glow. Maya, the I met someone rich and handsome glow. Or at least someone who is good in bed." Maya choked on her water. "Sarah, I'm just saying," Sarah said, smirking as she walked away. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Honey." Maya stared at her screen, the guilt settling in her stomach like cold lead. She hated lying. She hated the secrecy. But how could she explain Adrian? How could she tell Sarah that the man she was smiling at was the same man whose name was whispered with fear in the darker corners of Grey Ridge? She wasn't even sure what they were. They weren't dating. They weren't just neighbors. They were 2 people standing on a bridge that was burning at both ends, hoping they wouldn't fall. That evening, the text came at 6 o'clock, dinner, 7:30, wear something warm. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation wrapped in a command. Maya stared at the phone, her heart doing a traitorous flip in her chest. She should say no. She should stay in her safe, boring apartment and eat cereal. Instead, she spent an hour trying on every outfit she owned before settling on a black wool dress that hugged her curves and the vintage coat she had worn the night they met. A car was waiting for her downstairs. Not the black sedan with the tinted windows that usually tailed her, but a sleek, silver luxury car with a driver who opened the door for her with a polite nod. The destination was a building on the west side of the city, in a quiet, historic district known for old money and discretion. The driver led her to a private elevator that bypassed the main restaurant floors and opened directly onto the roof. Maya stepped out and gasped. The rooftop was a garden in the sky. Heat lamps cast a warm, orange glow over manicured hedges and wrought iron tables. The view was breathtaking. The skyline of Grey Ridge spread out like a glittering circuit board, but from this angle, it looked peaceful. Adrian was waiting for her at a table near the edge, far away from the few other patrons. He stood up as she approached. He was wearing a navy suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked devastatingly handsome and completely relaxed. "You came," he said, pulling out her chair. "You did not give me much of a choice," she teased, sitting down. "I figured if I asked, you would overthink it and say no," he admitted, sitting across from her. "I wanted to see you, away from the building, away from everything." He gestured vaguely to the space around them. Maya noticed that while there were waiters, there were no hulking men in dark suits hovering over his shoulder. For the first time, he was just Adrian. The dinner was incredible. Food that tasted like art, wine that was smoother than velvet. But it was the conversation that intoxicated her. Adrian spoke to her not as a subordinate or a conquest, but as an equal. He asked about her projects at work. He listened when she complained about the permitting office. And then, slowly, he began to open up about his own work. "I am trying to move the assets," he said, swirling his wine. "Construction, tech startups, real estate development, legitimate businesses," Maya noted. "Exactly. My father, he built an empire on fear. He ran numbers, protection, things I am not proud of. When I took over, I realized that fear is a currency that devalues over time. You cannot build a legacy on blood. It washes away." Maya watched him, fascinated by the intensity in his eyes. "So you are going straight?" she asked. "I am trying," he corrected. "We have acquired 3 development firms in the last 6 months. We are bidding on the city contract for the new harbor renovation. It is clean money, it is the future." "But," Maya pressed, hearing the unspoken weight in his voice, "but not everyone agrees with the new direction," he admitted. He looked out at the city lights, his jaw tightening. "There are men, capos, rivals, who prefer the old ways. Violence is faster than a board meeting. It is easier to steal than to build. When I move money into legal channels, I am taking it out of their pockets. So you are making enemies by doing the right thing," Maya realized. "I am making enemies by changing the rules," he said. "And in my world, people die for less." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She looked at this man, intelligent, ambitious, trying to claw his way out of a pit of violence, and felt a surge of protective anger. "Why do you stay?" she asked softly. "Why not just take the money and leave? Go to an island, disappear." Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes sad and serious. "Because you cannot just walk away? Maya, it is a machine. If I leave without dismantling it properly, or without stabilizing it, a war breaks out. A vacuum of power creates chaos. Innocent people get hurt. I have to steer the ship into the harbor before I can get off." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm. "I did not tell you this to scare you," he said. "I told you because I want you to know who I am. Not the monster they whisper about, but the man I am trying to become." Maya squeezed his hand back. "I see him. Adrian. I think I've seen him since the first night. After dinner, they walked along the perimeter of the roof. The wind was stronger up here, whipping Maya's hair around her face. She shivered involuntarily. "Here," Adrian said immediately. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, retaining the heat of his body. He stepped in close to adjust the lapels, his hands lingering on her arms. "Better?" he asked softly. "Much," she whispered. They stood there, wrapped in the cocoon of his coat and the scent of his cologne, sandalwood, night air, and danger. The noise of the restaurant was far behind them. It was just the two of them and the endless drop of the city below. Adrian looked down at her. The playful charm of dinner was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry intensity. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. His hand slid from her arms to her waist, pulling her body against his. Maya gasped softly as her chest bumped against his. She could feel the steady, heavy thump of his heart through his shirt. It was beating fast, just like hers. "Adrian," she breathed. He didn't speak. He just lowered his head and captured her lips. This kiss was different from the one in the apartment. That had been tentative, an exploration. This was a claim. It was confident, searing, and deeply possessive. Maya's hands flew up to his chest, bunching the crisp fabric of his shirt in her fists, then sliding up to wrap around his neck. Her fingers threaded into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. Adrian groaned low in his throat. His arms tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly so she was pressed flush against him. He kissed her until she was breathless, until the world spun, until the only thing keeping her upright was his strength. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but her blood was on fire. She felt consumed by him. For a moment, she forgot the danger. She forgot the morality. She just wanted to stay in this circle of warmth forever. Woo, oop, woo, oop. The sharp, wailing cry of a police siren cut through the air from the street below. It was distant, but it shattered the moment like a rock through a window. Maya flinched. She pulled back abruptly, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. She stared at Adrian, then looked over the edge of the roof at the flashing blue and red lights weaving through traffic far below. Police, law, reality. She stepped back, the cold rushing in where his body had been. "I cannot," she whispered, shaking her head. "Maya." Adrian reached for her, but she retreated another step. "I am scared, Adrian," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I hear that siren and I think of you. I think of waking up one morning and seeing your face on the news, or hearing a knock at my door and finding detectives there." She wrapped his jacket tighter around herself, feeling small. "I am just an architect," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "I design bathrooms. I do not know how to be in a world where people get shot. I do not know how to be with a man who has to check his car for bombs." Adrian closed the distance slowly, moving with deliberate gentleness. He didn't try to kiss her again. He just reached up and cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. He waited until her eyes locked on his. "I will never let that happen. I keep my worlds separate. You are the one thing in my life that is clean. Maya, I will burn everything I own before I let a single spark from my life touch you." Maya searched his face. She saw the sincerity there. She saw the desperation. "You can promise to try," she whispered, "but you cannot promise to succeed, not in your world." Adrian didn't answer. He couldn't lie to her. He just ran his thumb over her cheekbone, a silent apology for the life he couldn't change fast enough. "Let me take you home," he said quietly. The car ride back was silent. The air in the luxury cabin was thick with the things they hadn't said. Maya sat close to the window, watching the city blur by. Adrian sat in the middle, his body tense, his eyes scanning the mirrors. They were 5 minutes from the apartment building when the mood shifted. Adrian sat up straighter, his gaze fixed on the side mirror. "Take the next right," he said to the driver. His voice was ice cold. The driver, a man named Leo, didn't ask why. He spun the wheel instantly. The car swerved smoothly onto a side street. Maya grabbed the door handle. "What is it?" Behind them, a pair of headlights swerved to follow. "We have a tail," Adrian said. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded like he was reading a grocery list. "Leo, lose them. Do not bring them to the building." "Yes, sir." The car accelerated. It wasn't a movie chase with screeching tires and gunfire. It was worse. It was a precise, calculated series of turns through the dark industrial streets of Grey Ridge. Leo wove through traffic, ran a yellow light, and took 3 quick lefts. Maya watched the headlights behind them. They were persistent, aggressive. "Are those the enemies you talked about?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Keep your head down," Adrian ordered. He reached across the seat and placed his hand on the back of her neck, gently pushing her head lower, below the window line. He covered her body with his own, leaning over her, shielding her. Maya could smell the leather of the car seat and the starch of his shirt. She was trembling. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't a story. This was real. Someone was following them. Someone who potentially wanted them dead. "Clear," Leo announced after 2 agonizing minutes. Adrian didn't move immediately. He watched the rear window for another 30 seconds before he slowly sat back up. "You can sit up now," he said. Maya sat up. She felt sick. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't clasp them together. Adrian reached out and took her hand. He squeezed it hard, almost to the point of pain. "I am sorry," he said through gritted teeth. Maya looked at him. She saw the fury in his eyes, fury at the other car, but mostly fury at himself for exposing her to this. "It is real," she whispered. "All of it, yes," he said. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but Adrian never let go of her hand. When they got back to the penthouse, Adrian dismissed the guards at the door. He locked the heavy deadbolt himself, then turned to face her. The apartment was quiet, safe, but the adrenaline was still coursing through both of their veins. Maya stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city that had just tried to hurt them. She was still wearing his jacket. She felt like she was vibrating. Adrian walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He stood next to her, staring out at the same view. "You have a choice," he said. His voice was hollow. Maya turned to look at him. "You can walk away," he said. "Right now. You can go downstairs to your apartment. I will have Nico stand guard at your door until I can move you somewhere safe. Another city, another state. I will pay off your loans. I will set you up with a new firm. You can have a normal life, Maya, a life without sirens and tales and fear." He turned to face her. His expression was devastatingly resigned. He looked like a man preparing for his own execution. "Or," he said softly, "you can stay." Maya stared at him. "You can stay, and you can trust me." He continued, "Trust me to fix this. Trust me to find a way out. But I cannot promise it will be easy. And I cannot promise it will be safe. I can only promise that I will do everything in my power to protect you." He waited. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Maya looked at the man who had warmed her when she was cold, the man who was trying to turn a battleship of crime into a vessel of hope, the man who had shielded her body with his own in the car without a second thought. If she left, she would be safe. She would be free, but she would be alone. She didn't speak. She couldn't find the words to explain that the fear of losing him was suddenly greater than the fear of the car chase. She stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in the center of his chest. She held him tightly, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him. Adrian let out a shuddering breath. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair. They stood there in the window, two silhouettes against the city lights, holding onto each other as if the world was ending. She didn't say yes. She didn't say I stay. She just held on, and that was answer enough. The realization arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. It was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. The architecture firm was mostly empty, the cleaning crew humming vacuums in the distance. Maya sat at her desk, surrounded by the usual chaotic spread of blueprints and permit applications. She was tired, her eyes stinging from staring at the backlight of her monitor, but she needed to finish the preliminary zoning check for a new client file that had landed on her desk that morning. Vesta Development. It was a generic name, the kind of corporate title designed to tell you absolutely nothing. They were proposing a mixed-use renovation of an old warehouse district near the waterfront, a massive project that could make or break the fiscal year for her firm. Maya reached for the client disclosure form, a standard piece of paperwork that listed the primary stakeholders. She scanned the names of the board members. They were all shell companies with addresses in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. It was standard practice for high-end real estate, but something about the address of the primary holding company caught her eye. 1200 Skyline Avenue, Suite 4B. Maya frowned. She knew that address. She had seen it on a piece of mail sitting on Adrian's kitchen counter the night of the storm. Her heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. Just then, the door to Mr. Sterling's office opened. Her boss was still there, which was unusual. He was on the phone, his voice carrying through the quiet office. "I understand the timeline, Mr." Sterling was saying, his tone a mix of deference and strain. "But the city inspectors are asking questions about the foundation. We cannot just pour concrete over the existing structure without—" He stopped. Listening to the person on the other end, Maya froze, her pen hovering over the paper. Yes. I know who is financing this, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I know exactly whose money this is, but if the inspector finds out that Vesta is a front for the Russo family, we're all finished. Do you understand? Maya stopped breathing. The Russo family. She stared at the paper in front of her. Vesta Development, Adrian's attempt at legitimacy. It was sitting right here on her desk. She slowly lowered the pen. The walls of her safe. Boring office suddenly felt very thin. She had thought she could keep her life with Adrian separate from her real life. She thought she could have the man without the empire, but the empire was vast. It was like groundwater. It seeped into everything, unseen until the earth shifted. She packed her bag with trembling hands and left the office before Sterling could see her. The distance started the next day. It wasn't a sudden break. It was a slow, agonizing withdrawal. The morning coffee run didn't happen. Adrian wasn't in the lobby. The late-night texts became sporadic, then curt. Busy day. He wrote on Wednesday. Cannot talk. He wrote on Thursday. Maya tried to tell herself it was just business. He had told her he was trying to divest, trying to move assets. That took time. That took focus. But the memory of Sterling's terrified voice on the phone haunted her. I know exactly whose money this is. By Friday. The silence was deafening. Maya sat in her apartment, the television playing quietly to drown out the noise of her own anxiety. She had her phone in her hand, staring at their text thread. She typed a message, deleted it, typed it again. Her phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. It was him. Something is happening. Stay inside tonight. Do not open the door for anyone but me or the super. Maya stared at the screen. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold. What is happening? She typed back frantically. Adrian, no response. She stood up and paced the small length of her living room. Stay inside. It was a command, a protective order, but it was also terrifyingly vague. Was he in trouble? Was the building in danger? Was she in danger? She waited for an hour. 60 minutes of pacing, of checking the peephole, of listening to the creak of the old building settling in the wind. She couldn't do it. She couldn't just sit here in the dark, waiting for a disaster she couldn't see. The image of him alone in the penthouse, facing whatever something was happening, was unbearable. Ignoring her better judgment, ignoring the survival instinct that screamed at her to lock herself in the bathroom, Maya grabbed her keys. She walked out into the hallway. It was quiet. Too quiet. She walked to the elevator, but then hesitated. The elevator was a metal trap. If something was wrong upstairs, the elevator would announce her arrival with a cheerful ding. She opened the door to the stairwell. She climbed the 8 flights of stairs, her boots making soft thuds on the concrete steps. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. By the time she reached the 12th floor landing, her legs were burning. She put her hand on the heavy fire door that led to the penthouse hallway. She listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, she heard a voice. It was a shout, muffled, angry, and distinct. Gave you a choice. It wasn't Adrian, it was a stranger. Then came the sound of glass shattering, a massive, calamitous crash that sounded like a table being overturned. Maya flinched, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Crack! The sound was unmistakable. It was a gunshot, sharp, loud, and final. Maya froze, her entire body turned to ice. For a second, she couldn't move, her mind unable to process the violence she had just heard. A gun. Someone had fired a gun in the building. Panic, hot and blinding, flooded her system. She scrambled backward, away from the door. She turned and ran. She flew down the stairs, stumbling, gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. She didn't stop at her floor. She ran all the way down to the lobby, bursting through the stairwell door. The lobby was empty. The night doorman was on break. Maya stood in the center of the tiled floor, her chest heaving, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to break out. Phone. She needed her phone. She needed to call the police. She pulled it from her pocket, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She dialed 911. Her thumb hovered over the call button, and then she stopped. If she called the police, they would come. They would storm the penthouse. They would find Adrian. They would find the gun. They would find the business. I am trying to go legitimate, he had told her. If I leave without stabilizing it, a war breaks out. If she called the police, she might save him from the intruder, or she might send him to prison for the rest of his life. She lowered the phone. She felt sick. She felt like an accomplice. Before she could decide, the elevator doors slid open. Maya jumped, backing away. Nico stepped out. Adrian's bodyguard looked grim. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, and there was a smudge of dust on his shoulder. He wasn't holding a weapon, but his hand was close to his side. He saw Maya standing there, pale and trembling, clutching her phone. "Miss Collins," he said. His voice was rough, urgent. "I heard—" Maya stammered. "I heard a shot. Nico, I heard a shot." Nico crossed the lobby in 3 long strides. He didn't look aggressive, but he looked intense. "It is over," he said. "The threat is contained. Is he—" Maya couldn't finish the sentence. The word dead stuck in her throat. "He is alive," Nico said quickly, "but he is asking for you." Maya blinked, her mind reeling. "He is asking for me. Now? He told me to come get you," Nico said. "He said he needs you." Maya looked at the elevator. Upstairs. There was a man with a gun. There was broken glass. There was violence. Everything she had spent her life avoiding. Everything she told herself she was too smart to get involved with. But upstairs was also Adrian. "I will come," she whispered. The penthouse smelled of cordite, that sharp, metallic scent of burnt gunpowder, and high-proof alcohol. Maya stepped out of the elevator, her legs feeling like jelly. The double doors to the apartment were standing open. The lockjam was splintered, the wood cracked where it had been forced. Nico walked in first, checking the room. Clear, he muttered. Maya followed him. The living room was a wreck. The coffee table, a sleek slab of glass, was shattered, shards glittering across the dark rug like diamonds. A heavy vase lay in pieces near the fireplace. And there was blood. A spray of red drops on the hardwood floor near the entryway. Maya stared at it, her stomach rolling over. Adrian was sitting on the leather sofa. He was in his shirt sleeves. His white dress shirt was ruined, the right sleeve torn open, the fabric stained a deep, alarming crimson. He was holding a towel against his upper arm, his head bowed, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Another man, one of the other guards, was standing over him, talking low into a phone. Adrian looked up when she entered. His face was pale, sweat sheeting his forehead. His hair was disheveled, but his eyes locked onto hers with a desperate intensity. "Maya!" He breathed. Maya didn't think. She crossed the room, stepping over the broken glass without looking down. She dropped to her knees in front of the sofa, her hands hovering over him, terrified to touch him. "You are hurt," she said, her voice cracking. "You are bleeding." "It is just a graze," Adrian gritted out. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. The bullet passed through the muscle. It missed the bone. "Just a graze?" Maya shouted. The anger exploded out of her, fueled by the terror of the last 20 minutes. "You were shot. Adrian, there is blood on your floor. I heard the gun. I told you to stay inside," he said, his voice weak but stubborn. "Why did you come up?" "Because I am an idiot," she cried, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Because I was scared you were dead." She reached for the towel he was pressing to his arm. "Let me see." "No, you do not want to. Let me see," she demanded. Adrian relented, letting his hand drop. Maya peeled back the blood-soaked towel. The wound was ugly, a raw, angry tear in the flesh of his bicep, but he was right. It wasn't deep. It had torn through the skin and muscle but missed the artery. It was bleeding sluggishly now. "Get me the first aid kit," Maya ordered Nico, not even looking at the bodyguard, "and hot water, and whiskey, or whatever you have that is strong." Nico vanished into the bathroom. Maya sat back on her heels, her hands shaking. She looked at Adrian's face. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Pain, yes, but also a profound, aching sorrow. "This is it," she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "I know," he murmured. Nico returned with a metal box and a bottle of bourbon. Maya poured the alcohol over a clean cloth. "This is going to sting," she warned. "Do it." She pressed the cloth to the wound. Adrian hissed, his body seizing up, his good hand gripping the arm of the sofa until the leather creaked. Maya cleaned the wound with trembling efficiency, washing away the blood. She bandaged it tightly, her movements automatic, driven by shock. When she was done, she reached up to his face. There was a smear of dried blood on his temple, not his. She realized with a shudder. She took a clean corner of the cloth, dipped it in warm water, and gently dabbed at his forehead. Adrian closed his eyes. He leaned into her touch, his breathing jagged. "I did not want you to see this," he whispered. He opened his eyes, looking at the wreckage of his living room. "I wanted to keep it outside. I wanted this place. I wanted us to be clean." Maya stopped cleaning. She rested her hand against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble and the heat of his skin. "There is no outside, Adrian," she said softly. "Whether you want it or not, this is who you are right now. This is your life." She looked at the bandage on his arm. "If I stay," she said, her voice trembling, "I need honesty, not pretty illusions. Not dinners on rooftops where we pretend the sirens are for someone else. I need to know that when I kiss you. I might taste blood." Adrian looked at her. The mask he had worn since the day they met, the cool, collected facade of the boss, cracked and fell away. "I am tired, Maya," he confessed. The words came out as a broken exhale. "I am so tired. I'm tired of the violence. I'm tired of being feared. I'm tired of walking into a room and checking the exits. I'm tired of wondering which one of my men is going to sell me out for a pay raise." He looked vulnerable, broken, not a kingpin, but a man who had been running a race he hated for too long. Maya felt her heart break for him. She was still crying, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. She leaned in slowly. She rested her forehead against his. "You are allowed to stop running," she whispered. "You are allowed to want something different." Adrian let out a shuddering breath. He turned his face inward, pressing his cheek against hers. As their breathing synced, the frantic energy of the room began to shift. The terror faded, replaced by a desperate, aching need for connection. They were two survivors in a lifeboat, surrounded by dark water. Maya moved. She climbed onto the sofa beside him, careful of his injured arm. She tucked herself against his left side, her body seeking the warmth of his. Adrian reacted instantly. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her into his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply. "I thought I lost you," he murmured against her skin. When the door burst open, "My first thought was you." Maya lifted her head. She cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs tracing the line of his jaw. "I am here," she said. She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss on the roof. There was no performance, no seduction. It was slow. It was salty with her tears. It tasted of copper and bourbon and fear. Adrian kissed her back with a tenderness that shattered her. His hand moved up her back, tracing slow, soothing circles on her spine, trying to calm her even as his own body trembled. He held her like she was made of glass, like she was the only fragile thing in a world of hammers. Maya clung to his shirt, her fingers bunching the ruined fabric. She felt the tension in his muscles, the hard lines of his chest. The kiss deepened, shifting from comfort to passion. It was a reaffirmation of life. We are alive. We are here. His lips moved over hers with a desperate hunger, seeking to erase the sound of the gunshot, to replace the memory of violence with the reality of her touch. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Maya rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the rapid beat of his heart. "I cannot do this forever. Adrian," she whispered into the silence. "I cannot live on the edge like this, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the next crash." Adrian tightened his hold on her. "I know," he rasped. His voice was hoarse. "I am making the moves. Maya, tonight, Tonight happened because I cut off a supply line to the Vega family. I cost them $3 million in revenue to keep my own hands clean. They sent a message. He looked at the broken window. Walking away isn't peaceful, he said darkly. It is an act of war. It will get worse before it gets better. If I continue down this path, if I try to get out, the storm is going to hit us hard. Maya sat up. She looked at him. She saw the bandage. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the man who was willing to bleed to change his fate, but she also saw the danger. She saw the very real possibility that next time, the bullet wouldn't miss the bone, or next time, it would be her. She stood up. Her legs were shaky. "Where are you going?" Adrian asked. Panic flared in his eyes. Maya walked to the window, the one pane that wasn't shattered. She looked out at the city. Far in the distance, blue and red lights flashed against the buildings. Sirens wailed, weaving through the grid of Grey Ridge. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the phantom warmth of his blood on her hands. She had a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. She could leave. She could walk out the door, go downstairs, pack her bags, and move to a different state. She could find a nice accountant named Steve who liked golf and never got shot. She could be safe, or she could stay. She could stay and hold the hand of the man who was trying to climb out of hell. She could stay and risk becoming collateral damage in a war she didn't start. She looked at Adrian's reflection in the glass. He was watching her, waiting for her verdict. He looked terrified, not of the gunman, but of her leaving. Maya stared at the flashing lights. She wondered if love was enough to stop a bullet. She wondered if love was worth betting her life on. She stood there, silent, while the city burned cold and bright below them. She got locked out of her apartment. 1 hour later, she was drinking wine in a mafia boss's penthouse Part 6. The city of Grey Ridge seemed to hold its breath in the weeks that followed. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes a crack of thunder. Adrian was moving fast, too fast. According to the whispers in the elevator and the tense expressions of the men who came and went from the penthouse, he was divesting. It was a clinical, brutal process. He was severing ties with the gambling dens in the Heights. He was shutting down the loan sharking operations that had been the bread and butter of the Russo family for 40 years. He was liquidating assets that could not be washed clean and pouring the capital into shell companies that bought land, steel, and concrete. He was building a firewall between his past and his future, but the sparks from the demolition were starting to start fires. Maya saw the proof of it on her desk on a rainy Tuesday morning. "Mr." Sterling had dropped a heavy stack of files on her keyboard with a thud. "The Harbor Project," he had said, looking unusually pale. "The contracts are ready for the final review. The client wants to break ground in 3 months." Maya opened the folder labeled Vesta Development, Harbor Revitalization Phase 1. She expected to see the usual corners cut, cheap materials, inflated costs, money laundering hidden in the line items for drywall, but as she turned the pages, her breath caught in her throat. It was real. There were plans for a community center, affordable housing units mixed with retail space, a public park where the old, rot-infested warehouses currently stood. The budget was high, but every dollar was accounted for in legitimate construction costs. She traced the signature line at the bottom of the intent letter. It was signed by a proxy, but she knew the hand that guided it. This was not just a front. This was an apology. It was a concrete blueprint of a future where Adrian did not have to look over his shoulder. He was trying to build something that would outlast the violence. She closed the file, a surge of fierce pride warring with the anxiety in her chest. He was really doing it. He was dismantling an empire of fear to build a legacy of hope. But empires do not fall quietly. That evening, the rain had turned to a freezing mist that coated the sidewalks in a slick sheen of ice. Maya left the office late. She had texted Adrian that she was heading home, but she hadn't received a reply. That wasn't unusual lately. His phone was often off to prevent tracking. She walked briskly down 4th Avenue, her chin tucked into her scarf. The street was empty. The streetlights haloed in the fog. She heard the van before she saw it. It was the sound of tires rolling slowly over wet pavement. Keeping pace with her footsteps, Maya stiffened. Her hand went to her pocket, gripping her phone. She sped up, aiming for the well-lit entrance of a 24-hour pharmacy up the block. The van accelerated. It swerved to the curb, cutting her off. The side door slid open with a harsh metal screech. Maya opened her mouth to scream, but the sound never left her throat. 2 men lunged out of the darkness. They were fast, professional, and silent. One grabbed her arm. Spinning her around, the other clamped a gloved hand over her mouth. She kicked out, her boot connecting with a shin, but it was like kicking a stone wall. They shoved her inside the vehicle. The world tilted sideways. Her bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the pavement outside. Her phone skidded across the ice, the screen glowing bright for a second before the van door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The vehicle roared away, tires spinning on the slick road, leaving nothing behind but a lost phone and the silence of the empty street. She woke up to the smell of rust and old oil. Maya blinked, her head throbbing. She was sitting in a wooden chair, her wrists bound tightly behind her back with plastic zip ties. Her ankles were taped to the chair legs. She was in a warehouse. It was cavernous, dimly lit by hanging industrial bulbs that swayed slightly in the draft. Dust motes danced in the yellow light. She wasn't alone. A man was standing in front of her, watching her wake up. He was older than Adrian, with silver hair slicked back and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He wore a suit that cost more than her life, but his shoes were covered in warehouse dust. Lorenzo Vega. She recognized him from the news clippings she had frantically Googled weeks ago, the head of the Vega family. Adrian's biggest rival, the man whose supply lines Adrian had cut. "You are awake," Lorenzo said. His voice was gravelly and devoid of warmth. Maya straightened her spine. She was terrified. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a bird trapped in her ribcage, but she refused to cower. She thought of Adrian. She thought of the blueprints. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking only slightly. "I want order," Lorenzo said. He walked a slow circle around her chair. For 20 years, the families in this city had an understanding. We stayed in our lanes. We made money, then the old man died, and the son took over. He stopped in front of her again, leaning down, and the son thinks he is better than us. Lorenzo spat. He thinks he can just wash his hands and walk away. He thinks he can starve us out to buy his freedom. He is done with this life, Maya said defiantly. "No one is done until I say they are done," Lorenzo countered. He reached out and touched a lock of her hair. Maya flinched away violently. Lorenzo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. We wondered why he was being so reckless. He said, why he was risking war. Then we saw you. The little architect, the civilian. And he straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. A man like Adrian Russo is supposed to be untouchable, but you are a soft spot. You are a gaping wound in his armor. And love, my dear, is the easiest way to break a king. "I am not his weakness," Maya said through gritted teeth. Lorenzo smiled cruelly. "We will see. I just sent him a picture of you. I gave him a choice. He can come here, alone, and sign over the territory he is trying to sell. He can swear loyalty to me, or..." He let the sentence hang in the air, heavy with the threat of violence. Maya closed her eyes. She prayed Adrian wouldn't come. She prayed he would stay safe in his fortress. But in her heart, she knew. He was coming. In the penthouse. The silence was shattered. Adrian stared at the phone in his hand. The image on the screen, Maya, unconscious in the back of a van, burned into his retinas. Nico stood by the door, his face pale. "It is a trap." "Boss," Nico said urgently. "You know it is a trap. Vega will not let you walk out of there even if you sign. He wants to make an example of you." Adrian did not look up. His face was a mask of terrifying calm, but his eyes were burning with a cold, blue fire. "I know," Adrian said. "We can send the team," Nico suggested. "We can storm the place." "No," Adrian said. "If we storm it, he kills her before we get through the door." He said, "Come alone. You cannot go alone. I am not going alone, Adrian said. He looked up at Nico. Get Detective Miller on the phone? Nico blinked, stunned. The police contact? You want to bring the cops into a family dispute? Adrian, that is suicide. You will be turning rat. You will be finished in this city. I do not care about the city, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I care about her. He walked to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a heavy handgun. He checked the magazine and slid it into his waistband at the small of his back. Call Miller, he ordered. Tell him I am giving him Vega. Tell him I am giving him everything, but he has to wait for my signal. Nico hesitated for 1 second. Looking at the man he had served for 10 years, he saw the resolve. He saw the love that had destroyed the crime boss and created a man. Yes, boss, Nico said. The warehouse doors rolled open with a groan of rusted metal. Lorenzo Vega turned. His men, 4 of them armed with assault rifles, raised their weapons. Adrian walked in. He was alone. He wore a long black coat, his hands raised in the air, palms open to show he was not holding a weapon. He walked with a steady, measured pace, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Maya. She was pale, her hair messy, a bruise forming on her cheek, but she was alive. Their eyes locked. In that split second, a silent conversation passed between them. I am here, his eyes said. You idiot, her eyes replied, filled with tears. Adrian stopped 10 feet from Lorenzo. Let her go, Adrian said. Lorenzo chuckled. He gestured to his men to keep their weapons trained on Adrian. Not yet. Adrian, first, we do business. He snapped his fingers. One of his men brought forward a table with a stack of documents. Transfer of ownership, Lorenzo said. The construction sites, the waterfront contracts, the shipping lanes, everything you have been trying to hoard. You sign it all over to me. You kneel and kiss the ring. And then, maybe I let the girl go. Adrian looked at the papers. Then he looked at Maya. Maya shook her head. No, she mouthed. Adrian lowered his hands slowly. I will sign, he said. Good, Lorenzo said, relaxing slightly. But Adrian continued, his voice hardening. I am not doing it for you. He took a step forward. You made a mistake, Lorenzo. You thought I was trying to save my empire. You thought I cared about the territory. Adrian's hand drifted toward his back. I do not care about the crown, he said. I only care about the queen. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. What are you? Adrian dropped to one knee, but not to bow. He pulled the gun from his waistband with lightning speed. He didn't aim at Lorenzo. He aimed at the skylight above them and fired 3 rapid shots. Bang, bang, bang. The glass shattered. Raining down on them, it was the signal. Suddenly, the warehouse echoed with a booming voice from outside. Police! Drop your weapons! We have the building surrounded! The heavy side doors burst open. Armored tactical teams flooded in. Flashlights cutting through the gloom. Shields raised. Lorenzo panicked. Chaos erupted. His men spun around, raising their rifles. Gunfire erupted. Loud, deafening cracks that filled the enclosed space. Get down! Adrian screamed at Maya. Maya threw herself sideways, tipping the chair over. She hit the concrete hard, her shoulder taking the impact, but she curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut as bullets whizzed through the air above her. She couldn't see, but she could hear. She heard shouts. She heard boots pounding on the floor. She heard Adrian calling her name. Maya! Suddenly, rough hands grabbed her. She was hauled upright. Lorenzo had her. He dragged her up, pressing the cold barrel of a pistol into her ribs. He used her body as a shield, backing away toward the rear exit. Back off, Lorenzo screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Back off or she dies. The shooting stopped instantly. The police froze, their weapons trained on Lorenzo. Adrian stood in the middle of the room. He had dropped his gun. His hands were open again. He was 15 feet away. Lorenzo, Adrian said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, but sweat was running down his face. Look outside. It is over. Miller is out there. The feds are out there. You are not walking away. I will take her with me, Lorenzo spat, pressing the gun harder into Maya's side. She whimpered, the pain sharp. Adrian took a slow step forward. Do not, Lorenzo warned. Look at me, Adrian said. He locked eyes with Maya. He saw the terror in her face, but he also saw the fire. She wasn't begging. She was looking at him with absolute trust. In that frozen moment, time seemed to stretch. Maya saw Adrian's eyes flicker to his left, just for a fraction of a second. She understood. Lorenzo was distracted, watching the police. Adrian needed an opening. Maya took a breath. She stopped shaking. She looked at Adrian and gave a microscopic nod. Then, she threw her weight backward. She slammed her head back into Lorenzo's face with every ounce of strength she had. Lorenzo grunted in pain, stumbling back a half step. The gun barrel slipped from her ribs for 1 second. That was all it took. "Drop it!" A sniper's voice cracked from the catwalk above. A single shot rang out. Lorenzo screamed as a bullet tore through his shoulder. The gun clattered to the floor. He collapsed, clutching his arm. "Police! Move! Move!" The tactical team swarmed in. Lorenzo was pinned to the ground. Maya stood there, swaying, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. Her knees gave way. Before she hit the floor, arms caught her. Strong, familiar arms. Adrian, he pulled her into him, crushing her against his chest. He fell to his knees, taking her with him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I have got you," he choked out, burying his face in her neck. "I have got you. I have got you." Maya clung to him, her bound hands awkward behind her back. She sobbed into his coat, shaking violently. She could feel him shaking too. The invincible mafia boss was trembling like a leaf. He pulled back, his hands frantic as they roamed over her shoulders, her face, checking for injuries. "Did he hurt you? Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes wild. "No," she gasped. "I am okay. I am okay." Adrian let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I thought—" "You didn't." She promised. "You came for me." They sat there on the dirty warehouse floor, surrounded by shouting police and handcuffed criminals, holding onto each other as if they were the only two people left on Earth. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, statements, and lawyers. Adrian kept his word. He sat in an interrogation room with Detective Miller and a team of federal prosecutors. He didn't give them everything, but he gave them enough. He gave them Lorenzo Vega. He gave them the supply lines. He gave them the structure of the syndicate in Grey Ridge, in exchange for his testimony and the dismantling of his own criminal network. He was granted a deal. Heavy fines, probation, asset forfeiture of the illegal holdings, but no prison time. He walked out of the precinct 3 days later. He was no longer the king of Grey Ridge. He was just a man with a very expensive legal team and a lot of enemies in prison. But he was free. 2 weeks later, the Penthouse felt different. The expensive art was gone from the walls, sold to pay the legal fees. The imported rugs were rolled up. The staff was gone. No more bodyguards, no more drivers. It was quiet. Maya sat on the sofa, her legs tucked under her. She was watching Adrian. He was standing by the fireplace. Looking at the empty space above the mantel where a painting used to hang, he looked different, lighter. He was wearing a simple sweater and jeans. The bandage on his arm was smaller now. "It echoes in here," Maya said softly. Adrian turned to her. A small smile touched his lips. "It does." He agreed. "I sold the car today. And the beach house. Do you miss it?" she asked. "The power?" Adrian walked over to the couch. He sat down next to her, close enough that their knees touched. "I miss the security of it, maybe," he admitted. "Knowing I could snap my fingers and make problems disappear. Now, if I have a problem, I have to call a lawyer. Or a plumber." He reached out and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I cannot promise you a normal life, Maya. Not yet. There are still people who hate me. I will be looking over my shoulder for a long time. We might have to move. We might have to change our names." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "It is not a fairy tale. It is going to be hard work. Every day." Maya looked at their joined hands. She traced the scars on his knuckles with her thumb. She thought of the warehouse. She thought of him walking in alone, unarmed, willing to burn his entire world to the ground just to keep her safe. She reached up and cupped his face. Her thumb brushed the faint, yellowing bruise on his jaw where the stress had taken its toll. I do not want a fairy tale. Adrian, she whispered. She leaned in. Her eyes locked on his. I want the man who came for me. I want the man who chose me over the crown. I want you. Adrian let out a long breath, as if he had been holding it since the moment she was taken. You have me, he swore. Always. He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't a desperate kiss like in the warehouse, and it wasn't a guarded kiss like on the roof. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, singed, but together. His hands settled at her waist, grounding her. She leaned into him, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against her chest. There were no sirens outside, no bodyguards in the hall, just the wind rattling the glass and the warmth of his body against hers. It was a kiss that tasted of freedom. They broke apart slowly, but didn't let go. They stood up together and walked to the great floor-to-ceiling window. The view was the same, the sprawling, glittering grid of Grey Ridge, but it looked different to Maya now. It wasn't a map of territories or danger zones. It was just a city. A city with broken pipes and traffic jams and parks being built on old ruins. Adrian put his arm around her shoulders. Maya wrapped her arm around his waist. They stood there, two silhouettes against the lights, watching the city breathe. They didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring. They didn't know where they would live or what they would do. But as Maya looked at their reflection in the glass, seeing their fingers interlaced, she knew one thing for certain. They would face it together, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to She Got Locked Out of Her Apartment. 1 hour later, she was drinking wine in a mafia boss's penthouse. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Maya and Adrian. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story in English. Did you like the ending? Would you have chosen to stay with Adrian? If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate, thrilling, and emotional tales. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for listening.